again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. We've got a fun topic for you today, so let's get after it. So, hikers of Reddit, what's the strangest thing you've seen on the trail? Please remember to like, share, happy birthday, Oliver, and subscribe. Not mine, but my uncle's story. He was out on his land planning next year's feed plots. He walked down the path that led to the river and spotted a tent. Then he spotted a woman. The woman walked towards him. He was still and likely dressed in camo. She kept walking closer and closer until just feet away. She then squatted and dropped a deuce. He reached into his pocket, gently handing her a handkerchief through a gap in the leaves. She ran, tripped, and ran more. Found out that the corner of my uncle's property was a former hippie colony abandoned in the 80s. Children of the first generation had started to return. One time I was on a hike, I saw a group of dead squirrels, and when I say group, I'm not effing around. There were at least 10 squirrels just laying there, bloody with guts everywhere. I was alone and ran away from there, as I thought there might be a predator around. I, female, was on a day hike in Sedona, Arizona with an older friend, male, who's lived in the area for decades. It was a hike up the side of a canyon wall to a small, unnamed ruin with a beautiful view of the surrounding area. It's one of those unofficial trails that the old-timers guard carefully to keep the tourists away and would be almost impossible to find unless a local brought you there. I was honored to be trusted with this secret trail knowledge. My friend is kind of old school and a bit shy, so when I had to stop for a pee break, I walked through the bushes as far from the trail as I safely could so he wouldn't feel embarrassed. I found a good spot near the edge of a steep drop-off that was smooth and cactus-free. The moment I dropped my pants and started peeing with my bits facing downhill toward the drop-off, I heard a low, whooshing sound, and a mother-effing Red Rock Tour helicopter came rising straight out of the canyon directly in front of me. I figured there was only one thing I could do in that situation like that. I gave them a big smile and a friendly wave. I mean, at that point, what else can you do except just smile and wave for the passers-by? I'm sure somebody has a nice picture. Came across a homeless person's shelter. It had been abandoned long ago, but the person had caged a turtle, no doubt found in the nearby creek. They're somewhat common. Anyway, they'd abandoned the site and the turtle, which I suspect starved to death. It was a shell and skeleton when I found it. That sticks with me. The shelter was really low profile, and I realized why weeks later. I'd also found a Tupperware box with things stolen from the parking lot that was in view, but the shelter would have been an excellent vantage point to watch hikers drive in and walk into the woods. This person would then pop out of the shelter and sack the car for money, smokes, and all the random shit I found in the Tupperware container. Shit that a pawn shop wouldn't take. Hiking with my dog, came across a clearing in the trail I typically hike. Someone had set up a large rock in the middle of the clearing, then put some sort of meat-like pate on it. Then, they had set up a circle around the rock with the pate via smaller rocks and coin. My dog refused, absolutely refused, to cross the threshold of the circle. Some weird energy must have been there, I guess. Ended up having to bushwhack off trail to go around it to continue the hike. Wasn't me, but a stranger. Just something personally related to me. A good friend of mine went missing for around 7 months in 2019 and 2020, and everybody suspected her boyfriend, but he was already sentenced and prisoned for unrelated crimes by the time it was certain something had happened. So he was essentially rooted in place while law enforcement was trying to figure everything out and find her. It was months and months into the investigation, which had really stalled due to the pandemic. A hiker happened upon her corpse and only inspected it because she had been wearing a bright pink backpack, and he thought it might have been a child. As I heard it, it had been almost nightmarish for him because, without giving any nasty details, the nature of her death combined with decomposition made her look almost entirely inhuman but absolutely horrific. The poor dude ran out of the brush before he called the police and had to be gradually coaxed into guiding law enforcement to her body over the course of an afternoon. There was this walking trail that followed the river. The trail was supposed to be very old and used by Native Americans. I'd walked it, but was hard to access unless started at one end. I knew a place where it was close to road by a farmer's field. I wanted to use my metal detector to look for old coins. The farmer was there and had to ask permission, of course. I walked a few miles one way, then the other. I found funny brown bottles with 1929 dimes in it. There was a batch of wood next to a river connected to the farmer's field. It was sort of in a big C curve in the river. It was a river on all sides and could field on one side. There were animals' skins in the woods. I don't know what they were, deer, then smaller things, raccoons, skunks. The farmer was working in the field. He was kind of threatening looking. He was big and bald. He asked what I found. I showed him the bottle. He said it was his grandfather's. He pops a similar bottle out, brown glass that said Bel Air. I gave it to him. He said thanks. I told him about the animal skulls. He said, yeah, show me. I showed him. He was quiet, but he wanted to see. He poked the skull with his boot, didn't touch it. We saw another skull. He said, I think it's dog. We left. He said he didn't like the woods. He was 76, and he found skulls there since he was a boy. I said, some explanation. He said, animal heads don't fall off, while the body takes a walk. The strangest thing I've ever seen was somewhere in West Virginia years ago. Was hiking through the woods off trail, came across a big-ass random field that was clearly someone's farm. I was about to go around until I noticed a bunch of people wearing what looked like cloth diapers and head wraps while burning a cross with a pig hanging from a chain. They were speaking in a language that I did not recognize. They saw me. We both had the deer in headlights look for what felt like forever. A few started my way. I never ran back up a mountain in the dark so fast for so long. I had no effing clue what they were doing. I don't think I could find that place again if I wanted to. But West Virginia has some weird people in it, yeah. Strangest thing I saw in general was a dead dude wrapped in a tarp that fell off someone's pickup truck. They came back and got it. Also found dead bodies buried in unmarked graves in the woods of some property I used to have. I wasn't exactly hiking, but I was walking through the woods at night. Hope this counts. So, I, 13 female, many years ago, early 90s, decided to sneak out of the house to meet my much older boyfriend. Gross. I know. I left around 10 p.m. and returned 4-ish maybe. I just know it was still super dark. Coming home all of a sudden, I was worried about someone seeing me. I don't know why. So, to get from his neighborhood to mine, I had to walk along the highway or take a path through the woods. So I decided to take the woods. I had taken the path a million times. I was confident I would make it until I got in there. Oh my God, I have never been in the woods before at night, and movies lie. You can't see shit. It's another level of darkness that I wasn't ready for. I started hurrying, and I almost made it to the end when someone lit up their pager 2 inches from my face. I screamed and got the F out of there so quick and ran all the way home. Who or what could have that been? Someone just chilling in the woods waiting for someone? Someone just taking the opportunity to scare a young girl? I have no explanation. I tell people this story and nobody really understands the terror. I don't know, maybe I'm a baby. By the way, it did not teach me anything. I was back out the next weekend. Just had my boyfriend take me home, even if he was drinking. Kids are stupid. Oh, I know we all do things in our youth that are reckless, and I'm no prude, I get it, but this is disgusting. 13? When I was younger, about 35 years ago, I used to hike a lot in the local forest preserves. I would usually bicycle in and walk a few miles further on the smaller trails. One day I came across an abandoned house, but it was in such bad shape that I wouldn't dare go in. I walked around it and found the old cellar stairs. It was early afternoon, but only the first few stairs were visible. The rest was pitch black, and there was a chilly draft coming from out of the hole. I pondered going down just a couple of steps, but decided against it, so I threw a couple of rocks down there and never heard them hit anything. I noped out of there, but wanted to come back with a flashlight, but even after searching, I never found that spot again. Not my story, but my dad's, actually. I was probably around 8 or 9 and was around the corner while my dad and his friends were ahead of us. They were having a conversation about trees falling in the woods and if they made a sound. My dad says, if a tree falls in the woods and a huge oak fell right in front of them, blocking the rest of the trail. Myself and the other kids ran to see what happened around the bend because we heard the crash, and my dad and his friends looked like they had just seen a ghost. I was section hiking on the long trail in Vermont when my group ran across a self-professed stealth camper. We first met him south of Clarendon, gap breaking down a bright orange tent at the Minerva Hinchy shelter site. That evening was stealth camping in Clarendon shelter site, one to the north with plans to go south the following morning, back towards Minerva Hinchy. He was pretty much baked out of his mind every time we chatted. That same night at the Clarendon Gap, met a really cool LT through hiker. Every year he hiked the trail in one direction or the other. His reward for completion was adding another piece to the beautiful hiking tattoo mural he had on both legs and arms. 15 years later, I still regret not asking if I could take a photo of the artwork. I was walking along a dead silent trail when I heard what sounded like a shotgun going off, echoing through the forest. I frantically looked around, trying to figure out who the F was shooting, when I see a large tree 40 feet away start falling over and topple into the forest. The base of the trunk had just exploded, and the whole tree just gave way. No idea why. It wasn't freezing, windy, or had rained a lot recently, and the tree was pretty young. But boy, did that scare me, and I have a new appreciation of passing trees near the trail. I lived in a national park by myself for 3 months. Several times when I was going back to my trailer for the day, I would hear music, like a music box or an ice cream truck. It was always loud and sounded like it was coming from somewhere over my head. One day I decided to look for the source, so I followed a dirt road past my trailer. The music continued. I couldn't tell if it was getting closer or not. I had my eyes on the trees and looked down just in time to avoid stepping on a snake. I scrambled back, but it didn't move. I realized it was dead, and it wasn't alone. There were half a dozen dead copperheads stretched out in the road, looking in the same direction. I went back to go get my car because I couldn't bring myself to step over them. But by the time I got my keys, the music had stopped, and I didn't hear it again. Go for a walk on the outskirts of a very small town, 25,000 people in the middle of nowhere in Russia. There's a nice forest park with some cool and weird sculptures made by a local. Venture out further beyond the trails into the deeper and more overgrown part. There was a small comb of tree stubs standing before it. On the stub, what I saw was neatly placed horse skull with various bones, ribs I guess, scattered around by the stub. Obscure and secluded place, completely out of the blue. Bones were in effing good condition too, no yellowing. But perhaps the strangest was when me and my friend literally saw, Russian word, with our own eyes. Russian word is kind of like a forest guardian spirit in Russian folklore, but I don't feel like elaborating on it because people probably won't believe me, and both of us weren't exactly sober. I will just say that it looked like a 4-meter tall black shadow with a kind of hooded figure and glowing eyes. An abandoned camp in the middle of an unpopulated area with no camping, no public transportation nearby, mostly just a place where local people hike and ride horses. It is a state park with marked trailheads, but the nearest ones are miles away from where I was. This one is really accessed by locals. It was really unnerving because there's nowhere to park near there. It was several miles into the residential road, which was off another isolated main road. None of these places have sidewalks, and this spot is not marked on a trail. I can't remember if there was a tent, but a sleeping bag, old fire ring, some alcohol bottles, and some other things strewn about. It just really weirded me out because it was so out of place, and I was a young woman hiking by myself. I hate running, but I ran the hell out of there and felt like I was being watched for the 2 or so miles until I got closer to the road. I drove to a park to go hiking at night in the mountains, so safe I know, and I hadn't even turned off my car and I already feel like I'm being watched. There weren't any cars around, so I thought maybe it was just me being paranoid for some reason, but for some reason I look to my right and I see this weird-looking humanoid shape on top of the little bump hill about 50 feet away. At first I thought it was a weirdly shaped tree, until I saw the arms move, no wind at all. So now I know there's a person staring at my car trying not to move, for what I assume is for me to get out of my car and leave to a more secluded area, as we were next to the road. Of course I left. I don't go hiking at night in that particular park anymore. Bushwalking in NSW, Australia, me and my friend came across this weird platform-looking thing made out of rocks. Later that year, the cops arrested some bloke on suspicion of the murders of a series of backpackers who had gone missing over the course of a few years, and at the sites of several of the murders slightly off in the bush were these altars. Current affair shows run footage of one. The trial and run-up to it were all over the news. And yeah, it's that thing we found. The altars were typically no more than 300 yards from the victims' shallow graves. The guy who was arrested and subsequently convicted for the murders is Ivan Milat, Australia's worst serial killer. And B, the cops are pretty sure that the least one other person was involved in the murders than one now in jail for the crime. They just couldn't prove it. Personally, I love the idea and practice of night hiking, but in remote areas, I guess you don't really know who's out there, so just be cautious and have the proper safety measures in place and have a good time. I go out for walks very late at night fairly often, so I've seen a few things. The creepiest though happened about 2 months ago. I left the house around 1:30 a.m. and it started off as a normal walk. I wandered around the town till about 2 a.m., then decided to go home. I was walking back the route I had came when I noticed a black van meander down the street. Didn't really pay too much attention to it though at first. I did pay attention though when I saw it slowly drive by me for a second time. I wasn't entirely sure if it was the same van though, so I just continued walking, but this time I kept an eye out. Then, lo and effing behold, about 10 minutes later, the same damn black van came down the street again. This time I knew for sure because it didn't have a license plate. Now, I was fairly scared, so I picked my pace up a little bit. When the van came around again this time, it stopped in the middle of a road a few houses in front of me. I stopped, turned around, and booked it back in the other direction. I made a few turns onto different roads and then ran right into someone's yard. I waited behind their fence and the same effing van came down the street. I assumed that when they couldn't find me, they finally decided to F off. But I waited in that yard for about 20 minutes before I ran back to my house and practically threw myself through the bedroom window.